you just witnessed there was one of our resident herons catching a trout. But the contraption he's using to catch him a catch is actually an old eel trap. The latest reincarnation of the eel trap is a perforated metal sheet that lets water through but not the fish. There used to be timber slats at this end to allow the water to fill up, and this trapdoor would open using the handle that has recently broken off. And the eels would travel from the basin trap into the dungeon trap. The grate that you see from the side there is the dungeon trap, and there is still a rotted wooden door which actually looks rather beautiful. Now, the dungeon trap is not the official name for it. I'm only calling it that because Chris and myself are actually vegetarians, going on vegans. So we certainly won't be reinstating the fishery. However, it is still incredibly important from the built heritage point of view and the industrial heritage point of view, because eel traps used to be very common at mill sites. They were almost like a side hustle for the miller, because they had the resource, the water, and the infrastructure to go with it already. Eels used to not only be a food source, but their skin was also used to dress wounds, make clothes. Basically, nothing went to waste back in those days. Now, the reason why I say this is the latest reincarnation of the eel trap is because we believe that the cottage used to extend all the way across the stream, and there used to be an internal eel house on site. The 1830s valuation actually lists a fish house on site, and we believe that the fish used to be smoked here because of the ambiguous external fireplace at the cottage that obviously used to be internal at one point, and these charred timbers that might indicate that there used to be some kind of a smoking rack for the eels. Will you tell us a thing or two about the European eel?
Gladly. So the European eel, or Anguilla anguilla, is the species that we have living or spending their time in Ireland, as well as other parts of Europe and North Africa. First of all, as you will have heard, that the eels used to be trapped at the mill, and actually they would have been fished in many other places as well, and in all different life stages, which I'll get onto in a minute. But even if we weren't vegetarian, going on vegan, we wouldn't be trapping them today, because in fact they are critically endangered, and there is management plans across the world in Europe to try and basically regenerate and improve the stock of the species. That's again, I'll go into a little bit more about that later on, but generally speaking, what makes them very interesting and what makes them kind of critically endangered to some extent is their life cycle. So the eels start their lives as little eggs, and they kind of start drifting across, in the Sargasso Sea where they're born, okay. Then they start drifting across, we believe, on the Gulf Stream, heading up towards Europe and North Africa, where they then transform into tiny little leaf-shaped kind of eels, and they kind of go again with the current as they approach the European coast. They then metamorphose into little tiny glass eels, so they kind of turn more into the eel shape that you'd expect, the elongated shape, where they then would either stay in the estuarine conditions in brackish waters, or they'll start making their way up into freshwater conditions across, through streams and rivers, and even across different wetlands. And there they transform again into sort of elvers, and then eventually into yellow eels, which is the more kind of typical adult stage. And while they're in that adult stage in freshwater habitats, they'll be kind of growing again continuously, and they'll be feeding on little things like, sort of little invertebrates and on other fish, small fish. And they can stay in that sort of condition for sort of 20 years. In fact, there's a study in Ireland, I believe, that's found some eels that would be in that kind of condition up to sort of 50 years almost. And then at some point they basically make this transition again when they reach maturity, and they will return back downstream towards their spawning ground. And in the process of doing so, they metamorphose yet again from yellow eels into the kind of classic silver eels. Basically, their eyes enlarge and the dorsal fin lengthens. And they kind of return and change some of their physiology to allow them to kind of live in the oceanic conditions. So then they will make their way down. Interestingly, we believe that they actually choose a very specific time as well to do so, basically for highest protection. So they'll choose a time when the water levels are at their highest, there's flood conditions, and also really dark nights, so like new moon. Again, we think that's kind of helpful in their migration. So they'll go downstream, back out into the ocean, and then travel all the way down, up to 10,000 kilometers to the Sargasso Sea, where they will spawn, or so where they'll breed, and then they will spawn, lay their eggs. And unfortunately, that's the end of that particular eel's life, and then the new babies emerge and move again. And so, on that note, just like the herons, I'm off.